Great. So I think we are ready to start. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here with us. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. Bienvenue à toutes et à tous. Thank you for joining us today in person in Ottawa and online. Our IDRC and CAFIID teams are pleased to welcome you to this webinar today, titled From Insights to Action, the State of the Sector as a Launchpad for Policy Dialogue. My name is Rosine Yao. I'm part of IDRC's Private Sector Engagement Unit, sitting in the Center's Programs and Partnerships branch. I would like just to share a few housekeeping notes before we begin. So first, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from IDRC's head office, which is situated on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, whose stewardship on the land and waters we now call Ottawa date back time immemorial. Many colleagues are joining us today from many places near and far, and I also would like to acknowledge the ancestral stewards of those territories. Second, today's meeting will benefit from live interpretation in English, French, and Spanish, thanks to the Kudo plugin in Microsoft Teams. To use the interpretation, click on the Kudo button located in the toolbar at the top right of your screen and select the language of your choice. For those joining us in person, so you will see like printed QR codes have been distributed throughout the room. You'll just need to scan the code with your mobile device and use your mobile device headsets to accept interpretation. Nous utilisons l'interprétation de Kudo ce matin pour activer l'interprétation.
For you to be able to activate the interpretation channel, you can click at the button at the top right of your screen to be able to access the interpretation channels. You can get your phone and scan the QR code to listen to the interpretation in English, French, or Spanish.
And all participants are expected to contribute to a welcoming environment free from misconduct, harassment, and discrimination. Please also note that this hybrid event will be photographed and recorded. Event pictures and recordings will be posted on the IDRC and CAFIID website after the meeting. And we encourage all of you to come at the end of the event, if you're in person, for some pictures. Finally, please note that the chat has been disabled to keep our focus on the conversation, and AI note takers will also be removed. However, there will be some time for a Q&A period. In-person guests, just please raise your hand for a microphone and I'll be joining you. For those joining us virtually, please use the Q&A pane in Microsoft Teams. Thank you all again for being with us today. I will now pass it over to our IDRC Vice President of Strategy, Regions and Policies, Maggie Gorman-Veles, to share opening remarks on behalf of our Vice President of Programs and Partnerships, Mr. Santiago Albacoral. Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you so much, Rosalind, and welcome everyone here today. It's so lovely to see so many friendly faces who I haven't seen in some time. Donc, bonjour et bienvenue au Centre de Recherche pour le Développement.
Welcome to the IDRC
of the sector report. Thank you so much for those joining online and those who braved the cold this morning to join us in person. And we're really looking forward to reflecting on where Canadian impact investment, where the ecosystem stands today and where we need to go next. So at the International Development Research Center, I'll just ask everyone online to please mute. Thank you. At the International Development Research Center, we approach this conversation from the perspective of international cooperation. And from that vantage point, the message is clear. Impact investing matters because development challenges require not just more capital, but better capital. Capital that is transparent, accountable, gender responsive, and anchored in local priorities. Impact investment is not simply another financing tool. It's a part of our broader shift toward more impact-driven economies where public policy, private initiative, and research work together to deliver solutions that are economically viable, socially just, and sustainable. Over the past years, IDRC has been actively contributing to this shift, and we're very proud to share some of that today. We've supported research, evidence-based policy, and ecosystem building that strengthens how capital flows into emerging markets, the mobilization of domestic capital, and how that capital can generate positive social and environmental outcomes. Much of our work has focused on gender lens investing in particular, and how we move beyond simply counting the number of women-led businesses to addressing the structural boundaries and barriers that hold women back. This includes work that many of you may know, supporting entrepreneurs and funds that reduce, redistribute, reward, and invest in the care economy and care work, promoting impact, transparency, and accountability, and building partnerships that integrate local research institutions into impact investing ecosystems through evidence to inform public policies. These insights shape our programming and increasingly inform global conversations. C'est pourquoi le lancement d'aujourd'hui revêt une importance particulière.
Our role is quite instrumental, most especially with regard to CAFIID initiative. We are partners and we would like to contribute at our technical levels thanks to our case scenarios and all other initiatives. We would like to tap into the emerging capitals in Canada.
Of the CAFIID community. Through the Gender Lens Investing Community of Practice, which we co-steer, together with IDRC's Carolina Robino and partners across the ecosystem, we help convene Canadian and global actors to deepen practice, share knowledge, and push thinking forward. And this has been a space where Canadian leadership has been very tangible, and where many of the ideas we're bringing forward and that are featured in this year's report have been debated and shaped. So why does this work matter today? Because the global context demands it. We're living, of course, through intersecting crises, economic, climate, care, and inequality that expose the limits of traditional finance. If we want to mobilize capital at scale for development, we must ensure the ecosystems that support them are strong, that evidence helps guide decisions, and that accountability and equity are at the center. So in this regard, CAFIID's State of the Sector report performs a really invaluable function. It gives us a compass. It tells us where momentum is growing, where the gaps remain, and how Canadian actors, be they public or private, large or small, can work together to deepen impact. The report also surfaces the innovations happening across the country, including in gender lens investing, Indigenous-led investing, blended finance, and catalytic capital. L'édition de cette année met aussi en évidence un élément.
This year's edition focuses on very important initiatives. We want to tap into local knowledge, indigenous knowledge. Investors will draw inspiration from research conducted by local researchers and entrepreneurs that are instrumental in their communities. These will help build or draft better policies and bring about a sustainable impact. Whenever there is a local research that is embedded into a specific ecosystem, we have been noticing that this is where change occurs.
For today, I want to leave you with 3 reflections. First, Canada has a unique opportunity. We have a growing community of practice, strong public institutions, an evidence base, and a vibrant landscape of investors and innovators committed to impact. Second, we need to hold ourselves collectively to high standards. Impact transparency, gender equity, climate resilience, and community leadership must move from aspiration to large-scale action. And third, we do this best when we do it together. Now more than ever in our sector, we see this clearly. The State of the Sector report is a collective effort, a collective project. It reflects the strength of this community, and IDRC is really proud to stand with CAFIID as a partner now and in the years ahead to help build an impact economy that's inclusive, evidence-driven, shaped by the voices in the markets it seeks to help, and global in its ambition. So with that, I thank you very much, and I wish you a very engaging and inspiring discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maggie, for these opening remarks, explaining the importance of the impact investing space, the CAFIID community, and the State of the Sector report to IDRC. I'm now pleased to pass it over to Nick Anstead, Vice President and Chief Strategy and Engagement Officer at FinDev Canada. Thank you, Nick.
I'm also going to follow a rule of 3s. I'll try to talk about, because I saw it in the report, scale, courage, and coherence. But first, just thank you for having us here today, to IDRC for hosting, to the CAFIID community for this excellent report. I'm just back in Canada after 10 years away, so I'm trying to reorient myself around the community and really looking forward to spending more time with the IDRC crew and the CAFIID crew and all of you, both personally, but as well for FinDev's purposes as we navigate this landscape. And the report is fantastic. It's great to see that sort of made in Canada overview of this evolving ecosystem here. From what I understand, certainly over the last sort of 5-10 years, similar to FinDev's own journey, this has gone from a pretty sort of disparate group of folks at the margins to a really kind of powerful centralized group behind CAFIID driving a shared agenda, and that's going to be very helpful as we move forward. FinDev, which features a lot in the report, and some of our growth over the last little while features a lot, has been on this journey, alongside CAFIID. We have a portfolio over $2 billion Canadian now, do close to $1 billion in annual commitments. So there's significant opportunity for where FinDev is, but in the global ecosystem and in this highly competitive market that we have, that Canada is facing today, we continue to be a minnow relative to a lot of peers, and so we need to move with this ecosystem that we have, and move with Canadian partners as much as we can going forward. So, and that's going to be critical to bridge all of the gaps that were flagged in the report. So I want to talk about scale, coherence, and courage really quickly. On scale, I think it's important that this community comes together and focuses on support for the policy tools we already have, which is my shameless plug for FinDev, but increasingly attracting some of those partners that I think we recognize aren't in the room today. From the private sector, our institutional investors. I'll try to speak loudly so people online can hear. Our institutional investors, our corporates who are increasingly looking to drive resilience in supply chains, and build new markets for goods, but also drive their own decarbonization and sustainability targets where they are. We've got to do a better job pulling some of those groups in because they're already operating at scale, and we need them to operate at scale that follows the principles that we're talking about here today. And we need to focus on providing those solutions for scales where we are thinking about new solutions, whether that's aggregation or platforms to support other tools like that, to really sort of be laser focused. The scale is going to be a massive challenge. It's going to help if we maintain coherence, and that is coherence of our policy, both understanding how we go beyond just funding individual projects as FinDev and other partners here. Ready for it again now? And other partners around the table, But also moving beyond that to building those economic partnerships, long-term relationships in those new markets for Canada and Canadians where we're going so that we can move together at scale. Coherence of our capital, better aligning our upstream, midstream, and downstream resources, our concessional and commercial resources, our trade and development resources, so that there is a coherent offer that we're able to present moving forward. And coherence at home and abroad. I think everybody in this room recognizes in this current environment that we need these deep trusted alliances, and that those partnerships abroad that we as Canadians need at this moment, they're really forged when we invest in the growth and development of those partners, when they see us showing up over the long term to support their priorities. The folks in this room know that better than anybody. And we need to make sure that we're at the table advancing those discussions in that way and building those long-term partnerships. And finally, we need courage, and a particular brand of courage I want to leave the group with, and that is the courage to be boring. If we are going to seek scale, we need to recognize that the investment committees of the institutions operating at scale, they fund track records. They don't fund ideas, they fund track records. They need precedent, they need comps, they need structures that are familiar to them. The path to scale runs through simplicity and replicability. That if we want to close that development finance gap, we need, again, less breakthroughs, more cookie cutter approaches. And that takes courage, because leading to every big summit, everyone's after those announceables. Everyone's after being cutting edge and innovative where we need to be. But ultimately, that's not going to get us to scale. What's going to get us to scale is focusing on the classics of finance, which is being a little bit boring, building those precedents, and scaling through your traditional retained earnings, leverage, and making sure that we're able to drive those compounded returns as we go forward. So that's my final sort of call in this. We're going to talk about a lot of really exciting things that are going on, but ultimately, if we want to reach scale, we've got to get a little bit more boring, like finance traditionally is. So FinDev, again, we're at the table. I think, as folks know, we've spent a lot of time building our portfolio, building our book by leaning in where we know folks are already actively investing, and that has been with a lot of international partners. And we've established exceptional relationships with global DFIs, with other investors around the world. We've always been really engaged at home on impact standards and some of the themes that are really important to this community. We need to do a better job engaging now on co-investment, co-scaling, and doing some of those things. And so you're going to see us spending a lot more time here at home with this community, trying to find ways to mobilize this group and use our tools to support the broader group of Canadian stakeholders at the table, as well as continuing to maintain those strong international partnerships as we build this book and as we scale what we're able to do in this ecosystem. So thanks so much for having us here. And please, the door's wide open for all of us. We want to hear the ideas, and we want to hear how we can do a better job working with everybody going forward. So be boring.
Great, thank you so much. Be boring. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Nick, for your remarks and insight from the FinDev Canada team. And I would like to welcome Lindsay Wallace, CAFIID Chair and FinDev Canada Executive Director. Up to you.
Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Lindsay Wallace. I'm the chair of the board of CAFIID, Canada Forum for Impact Investment and Development. We are a network of over 140 organizations and individuals who seek to increase Canadian impact investing into emerging markets. First of all, I just want to say a big thank you to IDRC for hosting us here and for sharing, giving us the opportunity to share some of the results. I'm going to do a very quick overview. I'm going to try not to be boring, but I agree we need to make sure that we're engaging with the rest of the financial sector where they are. And I also want to give a particular thank you to FinDev, who was the lead sponsor of the State of the Sector report, but thank you to all the sponsors. I do have a few high-level highlights that we're just going to run through on the report, but please, I encourage you to go to our website and to download the full report, because we're only going to scratch the surface here. This is the third State of the Sector report that CAFIID has done. And it was based on surveys of CAFIID members, along with a whole suite of different interviews from key stakeholders, both here and internationally, just to try to get a bit of a sense of what's happening in Canadian impact investing into emerging markets. So if you could jump to the next slide. So here's the good news. Since our first report in 2019, we've had a doubling of assets under management. It continues to grow and to scale, and this increase is higher than the overall increase in general growth of AUM, and both also the growth of impact investment in Canada. So we're seeing a greater proportional increase. But the Canadian, when we were doing the report, we were trying to estimate, okay, where is this within the overall size and scale of the Canadian ecosystem? This is very tiny. You know, Canadian AUM in total is about 20 trillion. And so even a 1% increase in investments to impact would be another 200 billion. So, yeah, it's good, it's growing. A big chunk of this increase was also FinDev. So I think just building on certainly what Nick just said, one of the big objectives that we all have is how do we get more AUM into impact into emerging markets? Because as mentioned, the development finance gap continues to be significant. I'm not going to go through all of the details of the report. I'll encourage you to look at it, but just one thing to highlight that, just next slide, please. Similar to last year, or last report rather, Latin America and Africa remain the main locations of investment for Canadian impact investors. And, you know, we expect that this may change, particularly with the Asia Pacific strategy, but that's where things are at the end of our, when we did our data. So we had a theme of removing barriers and building bridges, and I'm just going to touch on a few of the key findings. When we were looking at, okay, one, what's preventing Canadian impact investing into emerging markets from growing and scaling? And we have three broad buckets that we explored in the report. First, and we'll get more into this, is regulatory and fiduciary barriers. There's a lot of debate internally as to whether or not it is allowed to do, impact investing is quote unquote allowed. Is it in violation of fiduciary duty? There's an ongoing perception that an impact, if you're doing an impact investing, that necessarily means you're taking a lower return and therefore perhaps not meeting your fiduciary requirements. This has been debated a fair bit, but it's unclear. And I think to Nick's point, you know, bankers like boring. And so if things are too new or too unclear or there's uncertainty, people tend to revert to what they know. And certainly in a lot of the conversations that we've been having, the blowback and anti-impact and anti-ESG related sentiment that certainly is happening south of the border, we're feeling a fair bit of headwinds from that. In terms of market barriers, these have been covered in our previous report, and many of them remain. And I think there's a great opportunity for certainly FinDev, Global Affairs, others to play a role in addressing them. You know, there's a lot of deal fragmentation. The deal sizes are not big enough to attract larger impact investors. There's a lot of issues related to data transparency. Capital markets in a lot of emerging markets are still very weak. So private equity and private credit still remain the primary vehicles for investment, but it is very hard for people to exit. And so that adds another level of nervousness. And then building on that again is this overall challenge of perception and knowledge. It emerging markets in many cases, and that of course ranges from, you know, China by some areas is still considered emerging to, you know, Benin and Togo. Those are very big, broad, different geographies. And so there's this perception that emerging, especially least developed, are inherently risky, even though we quote, I think, Symbiotics as well as IFC, some longitudinal studies looking at their returns on their investments, and they aren't showing that it's inherently more risky. In fact, many folks are considering emerging markets. These are the growth markets. This is where GDP growth is going to come from. But again, bankers like boring, and so if there's this really big perception challenge that we're hoping to address, and we'll speak to what we're hoping to do at CAFIID a little bit about that. Next slide, please. And I touched on most of these already, but it's just to kind of go a little bit deeper. There's other things that we can do certainly internally from a regulatory perspective. For example, the Income Tax Act makes it very difficult for foundations to do impact investing. They could do impact investing very poorly and then lose the, if it becomes like a de facto grant. And that then can be counted against their disbursement quota, but that's not necessarily the most forward-thinking way of lining up the incentives. We also know that certainly in other geographies where there has been an increase in impact investing into emerging markets, such as there's been some innovations in the Netherlands and in Denmark, they had more offerings, in terms of either putting things in your RRSP or even, if I were in Amsterdam, there's probably about 3 or 4 banks I could go into and say, I want to invest in microfinance in Africa somewhere, and I could, get microcredit shares or get a Triodos account. There's a lot of different options there. We just don't have those options here, and so there's something to do to, maybe encourage first mover advantage there. So next slide, please. Just touching on a few of the opportunities, because it's not just about the barriers. How do we come together? Certainly at CAFIID, we very much have taken this to heart. We continue to work with other Canadian networks, particularly the Responsible Investment Association, the Table of Impact Investment Practitioners, and as well through the GSG, and I'm delighted we've got some GSG colleagues who will be speaking a bit later, to really try to share and to learn and to understand, cross those divides, get out of our own echo chambers and really learn from each other as to what's working and what's not. And so I think most people here are from organizations that are CAFIID members, but if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. There's lots of opportunity for folks to participate, to learn, to share insights. So a few, we do at the end of the report have a call to action. So certainly, I know there's folks obviously from the government here. We really want to see, we're excited that there's been a scaling of impact investing and, from both FinDev, but also GAC has continued to invest. We want to see that continue to grow. But we do think there's time also for some, a really good whole of government perspective on, are all the regulations lined up to really encourage this? We think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from the establishment of a social finance wholesaler that was done domestically to really encourage social finance. And so an international impact investment wholesaler we think is something that should be explored. And then to leverage Canada's influence at the multilateral institutions to continue to push for innovative finance and blended finance tools and options. And I know that's underway, but we encourage others to do that. Next slide. Amongst institutional investors, we think collectively we have a lot of work we need to do to continue to shift those perceptions, to encourage allocations to greater impact focus, and to also learn and build their capacity. So the Dutch National Advisory Board on Impact Investing, they came together and put forward this great call. They called 10-4. 10% of all AUM should be towards impact. 4% of that 10%, or of which 4% should go to emerging markets. They're not quite there yet, but it's had a significant influence, and a lot of the financial institutions, pension funds have signed on to that. We suggested a 5-2, maybe halfway there, but we're not even close to getting there. But continuing to have that conversation and to push it, and to just continue to invest in staff capacity, awareness. We're finding at CAFIID, we're getting a number of individual members who are part of larger institutions and are, we want to encourage more people to join and to share insights and learning. Next. So CAFIID, certainly we've committed to working with other ecosystem builders and other organizations in the network to share learning, to help work on continuing to standardize the metrics. It's still a little bit of an alphabet soup when it comes to impact measurement, and to just break down the barriers and continue to learn from each other. And within the CAFIID community of 140, we continue to encourage others to share, to learn, to join the communities of practice, to join the working groups, to offer up innovative ideas and research. And certainly we want to be that platform that can help to break down those barriers and continue to share insights. And then finally, for all of us, we all have savings, we all have pensions. One of the big shifts that we've heard from when we were doing our research, certainly in some European countries, is that the pension holders demanded, that the pensions actually do more investment. So we all have a role to play when we're having our conversation with our, financial managers or at the bank. The more you ask for it, the more they'll start to respond and offer some of these elements. So, we think that there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot more that we need to do. Certainly at CAFIID, we're very excited to continue to share, to learn, and we hope to work with all of you on that journey. So thank you very much.
We all have a role to play. Thank you so much, Lindsay. So thank you for your opening remarks and the key insights you shared from the 2025 CAFIID State of the Sector report. I will now pass it over to our IDRC Director of the Sustainable Inclusive Economies Program, Erin Tinsey, our moderator for the upcoming panel discussions. Please have a seat. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to some of you that are online. Good evening. It's just wonderful to see people in the same place, and I'm really happy about the turnout. I know that we've got quite a few people online as well. So at this point in the morning, we are going to start just by grounding the report's insights that Lindsay just gave us an overview of into some real examples of innovation that show how we can deepen Canada's impact investing footprint globally. And one area where we see real growing momentum, those of you that work with us closely won't be surprised by what I'm about to say, is the care economy. But so we see the care economy is a key but really invisible barrier to advancing gender equality, shared prosperity, and of course, economic inclusion and economic growth. So we don't have a lot of time. We've got several speakers to go through, but it's just to give you a bit of a flavor and to, again, like to ground the report in something tangible that you can take away this after today's event. The four complementary presentations, some will be online, and I'm going to just invite the only in-person panelist, Emily, to join me up on the little stage. Okay, and we're going to, through these discussions, we're just going to illustrate why care really is essential for unlocking women's economic participation and overall shared prosperity, and hence how investing in care will advance gender lens, essential to advancing gender lens investing. So we're also going to learn from what innovation looks like, both in emerging markets and right here in Canada. And we'll hear about how investing in care can be redefined as investing in infrastructure for growth, and how to continue this conversation at the upcoming 2X Global Summit happening in Canada this year in the fall. So I'm going to introduce each speaker as they are about to speak. So with that, I will introduce Carolina Rubino, who's there on your screen. Carolina is a senior program specialist in my team, the Sustainable Inclusive Economies Division. She's based in one of our 5 regional offices in Montevideo, Uruguay. And has been a real leader on this work. So Carolina, I'm just going to ask you a question, and I know you'll be very quick in answering it. So from your vantage point, sitting there in Montevideo, and being the real leader of the program that we started a few years ago called Transforming the Care Economy Through Impact Investing. Maybe, I think it'd be useful if you can share why IDRC invested in this program, and what are some of the critical ways that the Canadian impact investing community can help move from recognizing the importance of their care economy to actually embedding care considerations across investment strategies in emerging markets. Over to you, Carolina.
Thank you, Erin, for the introduction, and what a privilege to be joining you today. I would love to be there with you, but I'm still being able to join thanks to technology, and now calling all the way from our regional office in Montevideo. So I'll try to answer to your questions, Erin, in a few minutes, and hope, that's clear enough. So maybe I'll start with the basics. What is care work? So care work is the daily labor that keeps households, families, communities, and economies running. It includes childcare, caring for the older or sick relatives, supporting people with disabilities, and doing the everyday tasks that keep our lives moving, like cooking, cleaning, washing, and in some contexts, collecting water or fuel. So care is what makes every other job possible. But it is largely invisible in markets and in policy. So every day, women do about 16 billion hours of unpaid care work. If this was to be valued, unpaid care would equal about 9% of global GDP. So we are talking about more or less $11 trillion. So this is not a niche, it's macro critical. And in my region, women unpaid care is valued up to 22% of some of the countries in Latin America GDP. So that's larger than many headline sectors. So treating care as peripheral leaves GDP on the table. And the problem is that also because care is so unequally distributed, 45% of working age women, so nearly 650 million, are out of the labor force due to unpaid care, compared to 5% of men. And each extra hour of unpaid care lowers a woman's chance of paid work by almost 40%, and of higher education by 34%. This depresses productivity, competitiveness, and growth, and of course deepens inequality and reduces the well-being of families and communities. Next slide, please. So, the Transforming the Care Economy Through Impact Investing program is IDRC's partnership with the Soros Economic Development Fund to push gender lens investing from representation and investing in women-owned enterprises to shifting structural constraints, specifically to reduce, redistribute, reward, and represent care work. And we do this through 3 pillars. One, research and evidence, and with Core Global, and I'm glad to see Emily there with you. And she will share more details on this today, but also with other partners in the Global South, such as Intellecap, Core Women, and Busara. The second pillar is blended finance and technical assistance for care enterprises, the type of enterprises such as GotCare, with Jenny here today, but focusing on Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And the third pillar is knowledge sharing and a community of practice to mainstream a care lens across sectors, such as our partnership with SUEX Global, and I am glad to have Jessica on this panel today as well. So in the Transforming the Care Economy Through Impact Investing program, we mapped more than 180 care businesses, developed 60 business profiles, 20 in-depth case studies, such as in tech-enabled elder care or domestic work formalization models, and Emily will share more. But what I want to highlight is that this is pipeline investors can act on now. Next slide, please. So here is the growth case in 1 minute. If we treat and invest in care like we treat roads or energy as growth infrastructure, the returns are compelling. Evidence shows that strategic investments in the care economy could create 300 million jobs by 2035. That is 2-3 times more jobs per dollar than construction, and with 30% fewer emissions. So closing childcare gaps alone can yield up to $3.76 in global GDP for every dollar invested, while raising women employment and tax revenue. So this is productivity and fiscal space, not only social spending. So let me conclude with 3 practical moves. I think everyone is with the 3 idea. So let's see if I bring 3 not so boring ones. So 1, invest in care as a sector. So use blended finance and technical assistance to scale childcare, elder care, domestic work formalization platforms, if and only when they also focus on care workers themselves and generating dignified jobs. So just to be clear, this is not about investing in any care enterprise. We saw also the perils of this during the pandemic very clearly. So this is about investing in care enterprises that offer quality care, affordable solutions, and dignified and decent work aligned to a vision of care as a public good. And I invite you to have a look also at a short MOOC course on scaling impact that IDRC recently launched, where we explore also the limits of scale. But beyond investing in care enterprises, the second call is to mainstream a care lens across all deals: insourcing, due diligence, ownership. Ask questions like, does this asset reduce time poverty? Does it offer childcare, parental leave, flexible work, shifting harmful norms? And link answers to value creation plans. And finally, build care into infrastructure and policy. So like co-locating childcare or health in projects, design transport for caregivers, mobility patterns, embed care metrics in ESG and performance targets, and so on. TCII, our program, already surpasses, as I said, more than 180 enterprises. So pipeline exists. It needs capital and a care lens across portfolios. Please feel free to scan the QR codes. These are tools you can start using as of now. And my final slide, please. Just to close with one concept that I hope everyone would leave today. Care is growth infrastructure. If we integrate it, we unlock labor supply, we boost productivity, we grow taxable output, and we build resilience. So this is a kind of way to deepen genderless investing in emerging markets. The CAFIID genderless investing case study in the State of the Sector report are resources that are here for you. And I invite you to engage with the report and the cases. Thank you so much. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Carolina. That was excellent. A lot of information. A lot of it is in, or some of the things that she mentions are in the report in the case study. but we'd be happy to share many of the documents that were on that quite busy but very what can I say, inspiring slide. And it just shows how, I think this is absolutely a scalable way to really boost and bolster gender lens investing in emerging markets. And we're going to hear more about some of those in a minute. But now I'm going to introduce you to Emily Boost, who's sitting here on my left. Emily is the co-founder of Core Global. She's based in Vancouver, but came all the way to Ottawa to join us today. So thanks so much for making the trip. And she's been our partner, or Core Global has been our partner in this Transforming the Care Economy Through Impact Investing program. So I am really just happy that you're able to speak and tell us exactly what you found. And I know that you worked really closely with social innovators that were coming up with solutions to transform the care economy. So I would like to ask you to share some key lessons from the mapping and the case studies that Carolina mentioned, and the mapping and the case studies of these purpose-driven businesses, and care entrepreneurs. And now that you're working with investors applying care lenses across sectors, including agriculture, what is one practical shift, or a tool or an approach, even if it's boring, that you've seen that most effectively helps investors integrate care into their processes, and that could be readily adopted by Canadian actors?
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. Great to be in Ottawa. Very cold, but lovely to be here in person. And just a huge thanks to IDRC and CAFIID for bringing us together. I think it feels like it's getting rarer and rarer to have these in-person events. And I've actually got an aid memoir notes I'm used to presenting on my screen, where I've got all my notes in front of me. So yeah, I'll try to speak to what is boring and scalable, but I think actually a lot of the work we've been doing is quite innovative. So really keen to continue the conversation over the break to better understand how we can bring these innovations to scale. So yeah, as Carolina mentioned, and Aaron as well, Core Global has been working with IDRC since 2021 as a key partner on the Transforming the Care Economy Through Impact Investing program. We've been leading the research stream with 3 of our partners. One is Intellicap, who was our research partner across most of Africa and South and Southeast Asia. Core Women, who was our research partner in Latin America, and Busara, who was our research partner in Africa, but specialized in particular in customer journeys, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So we did map, I think I heard Carolina say 180. I have 165 here. I think we've lost track of how many businesses we found. But we originally developed a taxonomy for care economy businesses using the 4Rs framework. And at the time, the care economy was something that was quite well known, I would say, in development spaces and with feminist economists, but not really that well known in the private sector, and certainly not in social finance. So developing the taxonomy and then starting to sort of map out who is in this space was actually a bit of a challenge. Once we completed the mapping, we decided to do business profiles. We profiled 60 businesses where we did a bit more of a depth overview of their business model, what we could find out about the impact that they were tracking, sort of the leadership structure. And those are sort of 4-page sort of business summaries that you can find on the website. And then we went further and we did 20 case studies where we did primary research and real deep dives into the business models, the leadership structures, but in particular looking at the impact. And so we developed theories of change for each of these businesses. And in the primary research data that we were collecting, we were looking at how to validate the theories of change against the 4R framework, using the sort of the user journey methodology that I mentioned that Busara implemented. And really, I guess at a high level, some of the things that we found were initially, like I mentioned, the businesses didn't see themselves as part of the care economy. It wasn't something that they identified with, which was quite interesting and a bit of a surprise for us. Maybe it shouldn't have been, but so that just created a bit more challenges to navigate when we were talking about the 4Rs and how their business models might contribute to some of these results and impacts that we were looking for. I think also another interesting takeaway sort of linked to that was that because they didn't identify as part of the care economy and really understanding the 4Rs pathways, they weren't collecting data to really demonstrate any results linked to this. Many of them, some were, but most of them weren't. So they would collect, basic demographic data, some, monitoring data around user engagement. Those that were sort of childcare facilities were monitoring data around early childhood development outcomes, but very few were actually looking at how unpaid care work for women was reducing as a result of their products and services. So that was quite interesting. But out of the 20 case studies, we then did a synthesis paper called Pathways to Impact, which is on our website. And we looked there at how can we pull together data that's quite disparate and not collected in the same way at all across these the different impact pathways and theories of change to really start to show what these businesses, when you do look at the data, what they are able to demonstrate. And we did find that for those that were in the pathways around recognizing and rewarding care work, so those that focus specifically on outcomes for care workers, there was evidence of increased incomes, better working conditions, feeling safer at work, and also enhanced skill development. And for those businesses that were along the pathways around rewarding and redistributing, and reducing care work, so those that focus on women as end users, we did find time saving, reductions in stress, better health outcomes for women and their families, particularly those that were in the sort of the clean cook stove sector, and then more opportunities for income generation as well. So all of those papers are on the Care Economy Knowledge Hub. You can have a look and a browse. Happy to talk more about any of that over the break. If we go on to the next slide, for the second phase of our program, we wanted to explore investment opportunities in community-based care, as the first phase of our research was really focused on businesses that were scalable and had growth potential. We knew that there was this whole other market segment that was evolving naturally and organically, but we weren't really able to properly research. So we've been focusing on community-based care, looking particularly at agricultural supply chains. And this is where care barriers are quite acute, and particularly during harvest season. So many coffee pickers, for example, are migrants, and so whole families relocate during a harvest season. That, coupled with the EU supply chain regulations on forced labor, means that childcare needs to be on site. So we recently launched a partnership with Root Capital in Costa Rica, where we're piloting a blended finance approach to support 3 coffee cooperatives. And this is through Root Capital's Women's Agriculture Fund. So they're implementing a resilience grant framework, and we're giving up to $30,000 to each of these cooperatives as seed capital for their care solutions. And so all 3 of these cooperatives have already been doing something on care, but they are sort of at different stages of growth and innovation in terms of their solutions. So the grant will support continued innovation. It will also enhance the services that they already have developed and also improve conditions for some of the care centers and facilities that they have on site. So they'll be using the money for community consultations to understand what else they should be investing in, upgrading facilities, training and professional development for the staff that they employ for care work, and also strengthening complementary platforms that they have, such as dental, nutrition, and maternal care. And our goal really for this pilot is just kicking off now. So the cooperatives are actually submitting their concept notes this week. So I can't say too much more about exactly what we're going to be funding. But we have a goal to learn around 3 key areas. And the first is productivity gains. So we want to understand the correlation between enhanced childcare and the speed and quality of the harvest. Secondly, we want to look at women's economic empowerment and agency, and to what extent increased childcare enables women to take part in more leadership opportunities within the cooperative and also increase their income. And then the third area is sustainability. And here we really want to look at how these care solutions can be integrated into the cooperative's business models going forward. So just in summary, for Canadian ecosystem actors, I think across our research, we've seen that there are a lot of opportunities to invest in care. So the first is companies that support care workers through the formalization and accreditation of their work. The second is that companies that have a clear impact on women's unpaid care through their products and services. And the third is that companies that address care constraints for employees and across supply chains, such as in the agriculture sector that I just mentioned. And the last point I want to make, so your question, Aaron, was around sort of what sort of is like a key tool or solution or pivot. I think there's 4 ways that investors can address care constraints for women. One is using the 4 R's framework to develop a care-focused investment thesis to decide where investment should be driven going forward. And then you can start with the Care Economy Knowledge Hub, as Carolina mentioned, for deal sourcing. Just as a caveat, the data I think is from 2022, 2023, so a little bit out of date, but certainly the 20 case studies that are profiled there, we did also look at the investment and raises that they were doing at that time. So you can see sort of the size of company and the growth potential that they have. The third area is during due diligence, using a simple gender diagnostic tool with a care lens or incorporating care questions into your due diligence can help you to identify gaps early on and also de-risk your investments. And then finally, linked back to the impact measurement piece, providing TA to the companies that you support through impact measurement will help investors to strengthen their measurement approaches and also help to build the evidence base for gender lens investing with a care lens. Thank you.
Great. That was a lot of info. Thanks for the quickly running through all of that. I know you probably could have carried on for another at least 20 minutes. So we just got a quick overview to like whet your appetite. And I think the TCEII case and initiative is gives us some good grounding and some good resources and tools that this ecosystem can tap into. And so thank you so much for that. We are going to move to our next panelist who's online. Jenny, is she there? Yes.
Hello.
Great. Hello. So I will introduce Chenny Sia. She is the CEO of an organization called GotCare, and she's going to tell us a little bit about care enterprises in Canada. So GotCare shows what care innovation looks like right here in Canada and the role that impactful social entrepreneurs can play to transform the care economy. Chenny, maybe you can share with us a bit of what GotCare does. I don't think maybe most people don't know who you are and what you do. And based on your experience, what's one thing impact investors often overlook about care enterprises, and how how can that gap be addressed to accelerate both business sustainability and social impact?
Awesome. Yeah, happy to. So we can just skip along to the next slide. So a little bit of background about us. So all of our investors in our organization are impact investors. Happy to chat offline anytime about that. That's a whole separate journey. And really the problem that we're specifically focused on is how do we fix the supply and demand issue that we have when it comes to healthcare needs across the country, specifically for older adults and people living with disabilities. And we can go to the next slide. And we all know sort of what that financial pressure looks like as a result of having, I would say, health systems that are in need of an infrastructure upgrade. And really, it's helping weave that thread of cost implication and savings throughout that entire ecosystem. So from the client or patient experience, inclusive of frontline pay, inclusive of unpaid pay, the impact to infrastructure like hospitals and long-term care and the cost of that as a result of lack of care in other settings, and including thinking about, for example, insurance companies in terms of what are they paying out as a result of lack of access to other things. And when you really look at that whole spectrum, you can then see, well, by upgrading and looking at how we can upgrade the sort of care infrastructure in our context, within people's homes, we can use that as a way of not just transforming the sector, but also to produce returns. So you can go to the next slide. So for us, the way that we do that is we focus on what we call patient self-management. So really around folks, family members and individuals learning how to manage chronic conditions or just goals that they have around their well-being, learning how to incorporate technology and health technology as a part of that. Dispelling this myth that older adults can't use tech. It's just really having a coaching model to support that. Being able to upskill family members and unregulated workers to really work with health teams in a more meaningful way. And also what we call these hybrid care interventions. So basically having a virtual expert paired with someone in your home to be able to have a more immediate impact that way. And we can just skip along because I know we're a little short on time. But yeah, so essentially in our model, we've yeah, I can go ahead, skip along. Basically, our patient and family members can self-schedule their own care visits. Go to the next one. Whenever a service provider is then providing that visit, we then provide the technology for them to track that. You go to the next one. Then the patient validates that that visit occurred. Go to the next one. And by validating that occurs, then we make that transaction happen. So basically what that means is the service provider did their thing, the patient approves it, now we pay the service provider. So you go to the next one. And this helps the patient or family have a sort of more visibility into sort of what care they have available, and being able to book it themselves, and sort of having this monthly or annual budget, either in dollars or hours, that they can work with. Kind of like, you know, the infrastructure of like a health spending account for your benefits, but really applying that in other contexts as well. I'm gonna go to the next one. And so as a part of that, you know, enabling people to have some of that technology in the home setting, that can look like, you know, whether it's active monitoring pieces. So for example, devices that can detect if someone took their medication, or passive motion devices, for example, detecting if somebody has been in a washroom for a very long period of time. Go to the next one. And really all of that, and again, coming back to that infrastructure piece, can feed prompts to the person receiving care themselves, a family member, or the next visiting provider. So for example, you know, if someone's loved one hasn't been moving for a while, we can send a message to the family caregiver to give them heads up, or we can dispatch a provider to check in should that if they don't have a family member, or should that family member not be available. Go to the next one. Can skip along. And so yeah, and so really the way that we've built this infrastructure is really to sort of help remove those middle layers of administration and coordination from the system, and supporting families and individuals to do that directly themselves. And as a result of doing that, people get care faster, but also funders of care actually save about 35% of the monthly care budget. Additionally, it does reduce the upstream need for more care, because you're getting faster access, you're enhancing coping on the spot, so it reduces other care needs that they might have. And care providers earn more working in a fashion like this. There's sort of like less layers. It's allows for less layering in the system, and so typically frontline providers make 15 to 20% more in this model than in a traditional model. You can skip ahead. So this is just to give you a sense of a case study of this program that we call the Rural Stopgap Program, which has been implemented in Eastern Ontario. You can skip ahead. And you can see, just by having this sort of digitally enabled model in the home setting, we've been able to free about 14.5 average hospital bed days per patient for those who have historically been otherwise, quote unquote, institutionalized within the hospital setting. And skip along. Yeah. And so just to summarize, you know, we've helped now 12,000 clients nationally in this sort of context. Having this type of infrastructure allows for a faster response time, but more importantly, it allows us to really think about cost containment, especially in today's paradigm, for funders of care, be it government parcels or insurers. And finally, not to forget that enhanced wage, that finding ways to use technology to enhance that service provider wage is ultimately what's going to lift consistency across our sector as well. So yeah, thanks for having me, and really appreciate you taking a few minutes to hear about what we're up to.
Thank you, Jenny. That is fantastic. I'm sure many of us who are sort of in that sandwich generation where we're, still taking care of our own children, but also have maybe older parents we're, looking after. This is just, it's music, right? It's incredible. It's really inspiring. Thank you for sharing. Ever so briefly. It's fantastic. So I'm just going to invite our final panelist for this part of the morning, Jessica Espinoza. Many of you surely know her. She is the CEO of 2X Global. Thank you so much for joining us, Jessica.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really great to see you.
Where are you right now?
I'm in Spain, so very grateful that I can join you virtually.
Amazing. So in the last few years, I think IDRC has partnered with 2X Global, formerly Gender Smart, I think at the time, to help advance gender lens investing by putting the care economy at the center. And the partnership has helped put research findings into use through the care economy community of practice that 2X Global convened. And you wrote recently an article suggesting to treat care the way we treat roads, bridges, or even energy systems, and so like as essential infrastructure for economic growth. So why and what can investors do?
Yeah, thank you so much. And first of all, I want to just say how important this partnership has been. I think what IDRC has helped catalyze, especially through the care economy research, has really given us the evidence base to move from kind of the sense that this feels important to this is economically essential, and for that message to really land with investors. And I think that's been the biggest shift that I've observed in the last couple of years. Because for too long, care has been treated as a social issue only, and in that sense, almost like a cost center. But the reality is care is infrastructure. Because if roads break down, for example, we know that the economy slows. If energy systems fail, productivity drops. And if care systems don't function, then the labor market doesn't function. We know that parents, especially women, reduce paid work. Families struggle, businesses lose talent, growth stalls. So when I say that care should be treated like infrastructure, like roads or energy, what I mean is long-term, strategic, and properly financed infrastructure. So rather than short-term pilot projects or marginal CSR allocations, really seeing this as long-term, strategic, and core infrastructure that is needed for the economy. And I think the exciting part for investors is that there is really a strong business and investment case, because investing in childcare, in elder care, in home-based care, workforce development, these are investable sectors that are tied to demographic trends, urbanization, aging populations, and women's labor force participation. So it's really macroeconomic. Now, what can investors actually do about it? I think what we've seen in this work under this initiative and with our community of practice is that, first of all, it's important to recognize care as a core economic sector, not just a niche theme, and to put it into mainstream investment thesis. Second, to design capital that fits the sector. So care businesses often need more patient capital, blended finance, public-private models. And if we apply traditional infrastructure thinking, kind of this long-term horizons, stable demand, systemic impact, that starts to make sense. And then third, to use a gender lens seriously, because care isn't gender neutral. When you invest in care systems, you're unlocking women's economic participation as workers, as entrepreneurs and leaders. And so it's not just equality, it's also economic expansion. For us at 2X Global, the care economy community of practice has been exactly about this. So taking research and turning it into practical investor action, and then moving from insight to actual capital flows. We've collectively achieved so much in the last couple of years to make the case, as we've seen on this panel, and we can now really take it to the next level, which is why I'm especially excited that our next 2X Global Summit will be in Canada this year. And it's going to be a moment to bring together capital providers to really accelerate this shift, including around care as infrastructure. So I would love to invite everyone here to join us at the summit in September. Because if we're serious about inclusive growth, care really has to be part of the economic blueprint. And I think we're now finally at the moment where capital is ready to recognize that. So yeah, thank you so much again, and I hope to see you at the 2X Global Summit in Canada in September.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. Really, really clear. I think there are other DFIs that are also starting to think about care as infrastructure and how they can use their dollars or their investments to integrate more of a care lens to their normal infrastructure programming and investments. So thank you very much to all of my 4 lovely panelists. I am, just really grateful for the time and all the insights that you've been able to provide this group and us. So yeah, thank you very much. I don't know if we have a time for one question. No, I don't think we do. No. So anyways, that's what the networking afterwards will be for. People can come and find you, and except for those of you online, so sorry. So yes, so thanks very much. And I think, as Jessica said, she talked about the 2X Global Summit, but it's also about, how do we as a Canadian impact investing ecosystem think about deepening the impact that we make. I mean, we use care as a particular example this morning, but I'm sure you could think of other places and spaces where the impact of the investing is really key, how we measure it, and who's doing the measuring as well, right? So now I want to just transition to the next section and the final section of our discussion this morning to talk more on the policy side. And we've got again some fantastic panelists that are joining us today. I would just like to invite Cam Doe up to the stage and join me, please. Yeah. Great. So this next section is called Accelerating Progress, and it's looking at the role of public policy. So in the previous panel, we explored one of the key trends in the State of the Sector report, which was Canada's growing role as a thought leader in gender lens investing, and what it looks like to deepen the GLI as a practice, including by tackling structural barriers like the care economy. So this panel is now going to just shift to look at what it takes to accelerate the impact investing field through public policy, drawing on some of IDRC's supported work with the Global Steering Group for Impact Investing, and to elevate the voices from the Global South to shape this movement, grounded in partnerships with local researchers and GSG national partners, and designed to inform global agendas, from the Financing Forum that happened in Seville back in July, even to the G20. So this collaboration is really pushing into next generation questions. So including how do we think about impact accounting, about valuation as the field matures? I think that's sort of what Nick was alluding to earlier, kind of the more boring stuff, but extremely important stuff. So we are really fortunate to have 3 speakers. Again, I think I'll just introduce as they are about to speak. Firstly, we've got Elizabeth Are you there with us? Yes.
I am.
Okay, great. So Elizabeth Boggs-Davidson, she was actually supposed to be here in person, but got bogged down by the crazy snowstorm coming from the US. So we're sorry to have missed you, but so glad you could at least join us online. She is the CEO of GSG Impact. We've got Shannon there, Shannon Music and Cam Doe, but we'll get to Shannon and Cam in a minute. Elizabeth, so from GSG Impact experience, what are some of the key policy levers that accelerate a shift towards impact economies, and why?
So thank you. It's great to be here. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I was snowed in, but just really quickly, because I fear that not everybody is familiar with GSG Impact, and we are that global not-for-profit. We're registered in the UK, set up in 2015, really as the successor to the G8 Social Impact Investment Task Force. And our ambition is to really move beyond building an impact investing market toward how do you create impact economies? We're looking for that systems change where impact becomes embedded not just in select investments, but in public policy, in capital markets, corporate decision-making, procurement systems, financial regulation, so that social and environmental outcomes start to become really integral to how the economy functions. And we've been doing this by working to create and to support national impact institutions, which are the GSG Impact National Partners. And you'll have the privilege of hearing from Shannon, who is the co-chair of our Central American Partnership. So today we're responsible now for 43 national partners covering 48 countries, with many more in development. And I like to say that GSG Impact is really a global community of very connected local partners. And getting to public policy, and so I have to say, we've been very fortunate to be able to develop policy roadmaps with the support of IDRC. And these maps are structured, country-led plans that help translate the ambition of an impact economy into practical, very sequenced reforms. And they help to identify the highest leverage policy tools a country can deploy. And that could be procurement reform, it could be catalytic capital vehicles, results-based financing, or measurement standards. And they work to clarify who leads, what comes first, and how progress is measured. So the roadmaps matter because what we find is that most countries don't lack impact activity, they lack that needed alignment. The roadmaps help align the incentives, clarify the leadership, and create coordination across government and markets. And we know that without that alignment, impact remains fragmented, and with it, capital starts to move. So what's been very critical to sort of the role of IDRC and to sort of our foundational role as well is that the global South leadership is really essential, because we also have learned that impact economies can't be imported. There's no universal blueprint. What works in Costa Rica may not work in Guatemala. What works in Peru will differ from Nigeria or South Africa. So through IDRC, we've been able to deepen the model by partnering with local research organizations to generate very context-specific evidence. And that has ensured legitimacy, but also durability and influence. And evidence that shapes global agendas, we know needs to be grounded very locally. So just some examples of collaboration, which I pulled out because I think it's important to highlight. The IDRC GSG Impact collaboration has been really catalytic in shifting both who shapes the field, but also how it evolves. And so in Colombia, our GSG, we're partnering with IDRC and Impacto Colombia to implement a really rigorous impact accounting system across local enterprises. In Peru, the support has enabled Aliados de Impacto. It's really to integrate impact investing into national development frameworks. And so what lessons have we been distilling? First, we know that by strengthening collaboration between our national partners and local research institutions, the partnership ensures that these policy roadmaps and the strategies that come out of them are really grounded in context, particularly around climate resilience, around gender equality, and around inclusive growth. Second, we through IDRC's support, we're able to bring that emerging market evidence into our global agenda setting. So outside of Colombia and Peru, there are roadmap exercises happening in Central America and Africa and now in Asia, which are all informing discussions at Financing for Development and the G20. And this is particularly true around domestic capital mobilization, blended finance, policy architecture. This kind of ensures that the global norms very much reflect what emerging market conditions are. And then third, finally, the collaboration is really advancing next generation work on impact accounting and valuation. So as the market grows, integrity, but also comparability really matter. And so IDR's support on our impact accounting efforts have really enabled piloting of accounting approaches that have been able to integrate gender and climate considerations and start to move the field from voluntary reporting toward credible system-level measurement that can influence capital allocation really at scale. So the partnership is helping move from that impact investing from aspiration to real institutional policy architecture. So I'll stop there because I know we're behind schedule, and I'd love to hear from the panelists who are there and on the screen.
Great. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Yeah, we are running a bit behind, but don't worry, we'll make it up. Yeah, it's fascinating to hear some of the things you're saying and how important local knowledge and norms are to all the work that we're trying to do. So I'm going to move to Shannon Music. There she is. Oh, she's gone now. There we go. Hi, Shannon.
Hi.
Shannon is the co-chair of the Central American Impact Investing Platform, or PiiC, that Elizabeth referred to. So, Shannon, in Central America, can you share a bit on where you are and the enabling factors for progress in Central America, especially the partnerships between local researchers and the GSG national partner, and sort of what does the collaboration look like? You know, when we first started out trying to get local researchers to the impact investing world, it just seemed like, you know, one was speaking one language and the other was speaking a completely different language. So I think that's evolved over the last few years. So, you know, what does that collaboration that's now being established make possible that maybe wouldn't have happened otherwise?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much first for the invitation. It really is a pleasure to be here with all of you. And I'd say that in Central America, we are at a really interesting moment in time. Although it's still in the early phases of development, there is definitely real interest and momentum around impact investing, but it hasn't yet been translated into coherent policy architecture. And that's the gap that we're trying to address with some of those partners that I'll be mentioning a little bit more as I go on. We believe that the timing is actually really working in our favor right now. Globally, there's an interest in sustainable finance and ESG. The interest is high. There's capital that's looking for credible emerging markets. And at the same time, Central America has real structural strengths like extraordinary biodiversity, a young population, the entrepreneurial energy, proximity to major markets, strong international partnerships, and also economies that are small enough that policy shifts can actually happen relatively quickly. So all of these things matter to investors, and it makes it a good time for us. So when we stepped back and we looked at this landscape, we felt that this was the right moment to move forward from conversations to concrete policy recommendations. And we decided to start with Costa Rica and Guatemala, but then this is applicable also to other countries in Central America to really help governments take advantage of this window of opportunity and become true enablers of impact financing. So as the Central American Impact Investment Platform, or PiiC, we, as we are known for our name in Spanish, we decided to create this impact policy roadmap to help governments shift from being observers of the impact markets to become active architects of it. And that means recognizing that governments can play multiple roles at once, as facilitators that catalyze partnerships and strengthen ecosystems, as regulators that establish enabling legal and policy frameworks, and also as direct participants, so through financing, investment, guarantees, strategic public procurement. And it was this desire to move that policy conversation forward where collaboration became essential. And I think first it's important to just highlight that the PiiC is collaborative by design, and this is something that's common to all of the national partners within the GSG. Our platform brings together organizations that represent the 5 pillars of the impact investment ecosystem. So that's capital providers, intermediaries, enterprises, enabling institutions, and government. So even the way that we understand the market comes from this multi-stakeholder perspective. And then when we decided to build and develop this roadmap, we started working closely with GSG Impact. We used their policy toolkit framework they built over many years. This provided the structure and the global alignment. And of course, other global examples from other national partners that had already started in this process. PiiC was able to bring that deep contextual knowledge of Costa Rica and Guatemala, those relationships, the practical experience, the political awareness. And then we partnered with INCAE Business School. It helps that INCAE is also a member of PiiC, so already pretty aligned in terms of the knowledge around impact investing, but they were critical to add that analytical rigor and that institutional credibility, because they're a respected regional academic institution, and they were able to convene senior decision makers and create space for these serious policy conversations. And then, of course, we're also so grateful that the work was financed by IDRC, which this really allowed us to dive into this seriously and thoughtfully. And now, as we're disseminating the recommendations, we're partnering with CEMPROMIPE, that's a Central American government entity that's also a member of PiiC, which has direct access to the ministries of finance across Central America. So really, you know, when you look at all of these different elements of collaboration, like what does it make possible? Like it's actually connecting all these dots as the global frameworks and experience from GSG, the local system, ecosystem intelligence from PiiC, the academic credibility from INCAE, strategic financing from IDRC, that government access from CEMPROMIPE. So in many ways, it's that collaborative way in which we build the roadmap reflects the coordinated ecosystem that the public policy needs to be able to enable. And this policy roadmap, very important, it's not the end of the conversation, it's specific recommendations and an invitation to governments to step into a more catalytic role, because we're really convinced that impact investing isn't just about deploying capital differently, it's about redefining how the public sector, the private sector, and civil society interact. And if done well, it really changes the logic of public policy, making it more collaborative, more evidence-based, and more focused on that shared value and that long-term resilience.
Great. Thanks, Shannon. I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes to ask you another question, but I just wanted to bring it back now to the Canada and Canadian policy and the development finance perspective. So we've got with us Cam Doe, who is, many of you know her, she's the Director General at Global Affairs Canada for Development Finance. So welcome, Cam. Welcome back. Yeah, lovely to have you here in person with us. So from Canada's standpoint, what is concrete, maybe one concrete actionable step, domestic or maybe through development finance, that could most immediately unlock greater scale and impact investing and then strengthen Canada's leadership globally?
So thank you so much for inviting me, and I don't get to talk in threes because I only get to have one action. So having said that, I think the one thing we can do right now is free up public balance sheets so that the private sector can move in, like if that's the true action, right? So maybe taking a step back, the issue here isn't that we lack global capital. We don't, right? There's lots of it. But the problem is that it's not flowing to the right places. So it's not going to the emerging and developing economies where it can really stimulate growth and really create jobs. So what we can do and what we do know, right, according to what Lindsay said in the state of the report as well, it says that impact investing, it's growing, doubling, right? But it's still really, really small, right? So we need to scale it internationally. And to do that, there's so many barriers, right? But one of the biggest barriers today, I think, is that public institutions, donors, DFIs, multilateral development banks, all of us, we hold on to strong seasoned assets for far too long, right? We need to let it go and let the private sector come in. And these institutions, we've all done the hard work, rigorous due diligence, decades of proven performance, data, evidence has shown through the GEMS database shows that the perceived risk is much, much lower than the actual risk. So if we want to mobilize private capital at scale, we need to sell down these assets or transfer them, right? Once the riskiest phase of these investments have passed and move it on to the private sector. And we're starting to see that. There are a couple examples of that happening right now. So there's the Allianz ACE fund, where private institutional investors are buying down DFI originated loans. There's also the Scale platform, which was launched last year through the G7, looking at shared standards and aligned impact goals. And we're hoping to launch our first vehicle this summer at Hamburg. And this is really what is the call for that G7 common principles for private capital mobilization that Canada led on last year. This is really looking at how to move from the what to the how, right? To be really, really practical about that. So if I can summarize that, I think what we need to do is we need to let public capital do what it does best: originate, de-risk, and then pass the torch on to the private sector.
Wow, great. Very clear message. Thank you. That's amazing. I'm going to circle back to Elizabeth now. If we can get her back on the screen. There we go. Yeah, good. So you were mentioning, Elizabeth, that through the work that you've done with us, GSG has been intentionally putting Global South voices at the forefront, in the driver's seat, while shaping global agendas. I just wondered if you could share an example of Global South-led evidence that's influencing international policy dialogues and conversations, like the FFD4, Financing for Development, or the G20, and where the sort of the next generation issues like impact accounting fit into those conversations.
Sure, and maybe picking it up a little from Cam as well. I think an example that comes really from the policy lessons that emerged from our work on SME mobilization and the national roadmaps that we've carried out in emerging markets, that across Peru or Central America, but other geographies, evidence is really consistent. The constraint is less the supply of capital and much more the right financial architecture for this SME mobilization. And what local actors have told us and what our research has confirmed is that mobilizing private capital requires risk-sharing models that absorb that early stage uncertainty. Guarantee mechanisms are so effective that crowd in institutional investors, blended finance structures that are quite disciplined and designed to be, purposefully catalytic with a tranche, and critically anchoring all of this really in domestic capital, not relying on foreign inflows. These lessons are now shaping conversations at Financing for Development and with the G20. The narrative has really shifted over the last year, I would say. How do we mobilize more private capital was the past, and today it's how do we build national policy architecture that unlocks domestic capital, the pension funds, the insurance assets, local savings at scale. So I think this is where next generation issues like impact accounting come in. As the market grows into the trillions, voluntary reporting is just insufficient. And we, through IDR support, we are piloting impact accounting approaches specifically in emerging markets that try to bring in, gender and climate priorities while assuring that standards are shaped by those global South realities. And we're also building, which I'm excited about, a new impact economy index. So working to put into place this year a new benchmarking tool that will assess how well countries are putting the policy, the capital, measurement infrastructure in place to enable impact economies to grow. So the ambition is to, and this index will measure, will help rank, compare how effectively national systems are enabling that transition to an impact economy, and ideally give governments a roadmap for reform, but investors that needed trusting signal of market readiness. It's not boringness. It's consistency, simplicity, but readiness, and civil society a basis for accountability. So as a global public good, we think this index will make system conditions visible and comparable and hopefully actionable, and thereby replace some of those assumptions with evidence and create new incentives for reform is what we're after. So thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, and building track records, right? Building up the track.
Absolutely.
Which
Yeah.
what Nick also used. He didn't just use boring. He used track record.
No, track records, coherence, scale. All of those go together, Nick. I agree.
So I'm going to move back to Shannon. Yeah, there she is. So you kind of alluded to it, but you were saying that within this regional group, that peer learning is a core part of the work that you're doing. You've got all these different pillars of organizations that feed into PiiC. What is maybe one innovation or approach? So I'm emphasizing one because we have so little time left, but maybe an innovation or approach emerging from the global South, maybe through roadmaps, partnerships, in practice that could genuinely strengthen policy or market building in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think one, and I'll definitely keep it to just one, that I would highlight is something that Costa Rica has been doing for nearly 3 decades with remarkable success. And I choose this instead of other things that perhaps that are more attributable to us, because really this has had astounding impact. And I think it really shows how governments can play a role and the impact that they can have when they do this well. And I'm referring to Costa Rica's Payments for Environmental Services program, or PES. And as I mentioned, it's now a part of how the country functions. So it's no longer something new, but globally, it remains one of the clearest examples of a government designing and sustaining a national scale pay for results system. And it is really one of the key elements that has allowed Costa Rica to go from being one of the world's largest deforesters, with our forest cover decreasing to a low point of 21% in 1987, to being the first tropical country to reverse their deforestation, regenerating lands, and reaching today nearly 60% forest cover, according to the World Bank and the United Nations Climate Change Program. So at the core, the PES is simple. If landowners generate measurable public goods like forest conservation, reforestation, watershed protection, biodiversity protection, or carbon sequestration, the state compensates them. But what makes it very powerful is how it was built. So first, it rests on stable institutional financing. The program was established under a forestry law in 1996. The law did something very bold, which was to legally recognize environmental services as economic goods. It created the National Forestry Financing Fund, or FONAFIFO, to administer the program, and it earmarked a portion of national fuel tax to finance those services. So from the very beginning, the PES was embedded in legislation, and it was backed by this predictable domestic funding. And then over time, additional sources of funding were layered in, like water tariffs, climate finance, and private contributions. Second, and we've talked about the monitoring, Costa Rica invested it very early in that credibility and that monitoring. So the payments are tied to verified compliance. There's forestry evaluations, site visits, audits, and they now have one of the most advanced national land use and ecosystem monitoring system in the region that integrates satellite data and administrative records. So it's very clear that you need that technical and that trust for these result systems to endure. Third, the PES is inclusive. So Indigenous territories and communities have been intentionally incorporated as key stewards of forest ecosystems. Many of the contracts prioritize smallholders, and the payments flow directly to those that are managing the land. So in addition to being environmental policy, it's also rural development policy and social inclusion policy. And fourth, PES never framed forests as untouchable, but it allowed from the beginning for mixed use, regenerative production models. So the land can remain forested while supporting timber harvesting, wood products, and other non-timber forest products. So the forests are seen as living economic systems, and conservation and production are not positioned as opposites. And the results have been truly extraordinary. So the country didn't just stop forest loss, it restored ecosystems. That regeneration actually reshaped the economy. So ecotourism expanded, rural incomes diversified, biodiversity became a strategic asset, and Costa Rica has been recognized internationally for demonstrating that economic development and ecological regeneration can move together. And important is they haven't stopped innovating. So we recently became one of the first governments to make payments for marine environmental services. So that's now incorporated mangrove protection into the national PES framework. And what's interesting is we really have gone from a financial mechanism to really a whole cultural shift in the country. So it assigned value to a positive externality that was before invisible, and it changed all these decisions about land use. It crowded in complementary economic activity. It allowed for even these PES contracts to serve as for landowners as access to credit. So over time, it really has even become, helped conservation become part of the national identity. And for Canada, the lesson is not simply about forests. I think it's about institutional design, about governments creating durable, credible, results-based systems that align incentives around measurable public goods. And that when governments build that kind of infrastructure, markets follow. And regeneration in this way is not a project, but it really becomes a developmental pathway.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. What an incredible story to share. We have so much to learn in Canada for sure. And hopefully that, that type of approach is trying to be replicated in other parts of the world, because it just seems absolutely very, very, very impactful. I'm going to go back to Cam then and ask you maybe about the we know that many countries are exploring next generation policy issues like impact transparency, measurement, impact accounting, and so forth, to build trust and reduce fragmentation. So where do you see Canada best positioned to support the convergence and the credibility? Convergence too, but I mean the convergence and the credibility, especially through collaboration with Global South partners. And like, how can Canadian impact investing players and the ecosystem collaborate?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying not to fall off this chair. I don't know how you did it. It's so slippery. Hold still. I'm very fidgety. So I think there are two ways we can do it. I think the first is championing credible and consistent standards. And the second one is to use our networks, both domestic and globally, to turn those standards into practice, right? So on the first one, Canada's, I think, already shown leadership in this area. A great example is the 2X criteria on gender. Canada, we helped build that standard. We use it ourselves, and we mandated of all of our partners to use it as well. So we really, and it was touched upon in the previous panel in terms of how we all integrate that in. And I think also we should be learning from others. So this here is a great example of that, learning from our peers, from fund managers, and more importantly, learning from the communities we work with, all of which I think feeds back into the learning process for greater impact. And at the end of the day, what we're looking for is impact investing that's more impactful, more accessible, and more globally used, right? But we all know that standards alone aren't going to help actually build capital. At the end of the day, we need also strong economic rationale for actually investing with impact. So whether that's gender lens investing or climate action or resilience, or even diversifying investments into emerging markets. And this last one is really, really important for institutional investors, right? The major banks, pension funds, insurance companies. And I think in development circles, we tend to lead a lot with stories and impact. And that is so important. Please do not go back and quote me on that. That's not important. That is so important. But I think we also shouldn't shy away from the economic evidence, right? And really put that into our rationale. And I think Carolina spoke about that as well. And that's the great work that IDRC is doing right now with your partners. And at the end of the day, for many of the investors, credible impact matters. But ultimately, it comes down to the economics, right? The finances, what is the return on investment? And we need to make that clear as we integrate that into our standards. And I think the scale platform, which I talked about earlier, is a really a good example because it offers a clear and practical pathway to turn impact standards into action, right? So what it does is it brings together donors and institutional investors around the same table. And we talk about and we agree to standards, and we integrate them into these investment vehicles on day one. So we all have to agree to those standards. And hopefully, I said the first vehicle in July. I think on the second one, in terms of networks, well-crafted standards only go so far if they're not implemented. So this is, I think, where Canada is really well positioned to use our networks and our alliances to put them into practice in a meaningful way. So I think, working with global South partners for Canada ourselves, our missions, Stephen's here, so our missions and our embassies, they work really, really closely, directly supporting local impact investing ecosystems, right? And we can do more. Like this includes our business accelerators, the networks of investors and fund managers and so forth, regulators and policymakers, right? And I think one example I can give you is our longstanding relationship with the Toronto Centre, right? They're there to really help strengthen the financial regulation and build more inclusive, stable financial systems. Nick calls it boring, but I think financing is fun. So I'm all about finance. And then maybe another example is the just last month, the Impact Investment Exchange, the IIX, launched their Impact Investing Readiness in Indonesia program with Canada support. And this is really focused on women-focused impact enterprises through targeted readiness investments, as it supports partnerships with and connects them with investors. So I think these local networks really have deep expertise and lived experiences, and we've only begun to tap into that knowledge. So I'm really, really grateful to have this session here where we can learn from others, and I think we need to do more of it, right? So these in-person or hybrid sessions, I think, are really useful and give us an opportunity to share and to exchange. And here in Canada, we should all applaud ourselves, right, for the ecosystem that we're growing. So institutions or networks like CAFIID, the Responsible Investment Association, I know Lindsay already spoke to them, the Table for Impact Investment Partnerships, it shows that we're maturing, right? And we need to support it and it needs to grow. So I think in summary, we can champion credible, trusted impact standards, and we can use that to reach our networks, both domestic and globally. So I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thanks to our other panelists as well, Elizabeth and Shannon. Thank you so much. I've personally learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience has also learned a lot from what you've been able to share with us today. I wanted to just take a moment to see if there are any questions from the floor or from online. I don't know if can they lift their hand up? Is that enabled on the chat? I know the chat's disabled. Oh, is there? Oh, okay. And there is a microphone somewhere. Take that one. Yeah, so if there's a question or a comment to any of the panelists, don't be shy. Yeah, you're so clear. Exactly. No questions at all.
Hello. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Good morning. My question is around the opportunity in emphasizing impact investing and touching on trade, especially with emerging markets, Africa, Central America, South America. I've been working in the development space, and anytime we see the level of work that we've done, you almost question why you don't see a lot of trade happening. And so it'd be nice to just see even maybe the state of the report, maybe next year's one. Would that also have like a focus on trade, and also how Canadian investment ecosystem is driving that? My work centers around trade between Africa and global markets, and I think that's an opportunity to really advance impact investing. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, trade is definitely mentioned in the report. It's not sort of but I absolutely hear your point. Maybe, Lindsay, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Dara, for that suggestion. It is mentioned, but we did survey our members who were primarily investors, but I agree with you. It's flow of money, flow of goods. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. So certainly that's something that we can look at. Just thinking off the top of my head, we don't have that many members that would be super involved, so it might involve a wider survey. But I agree with you; they're very much interconnected.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Online, you have the Q&A panel that you can use to share a question, or in person, you can just raise your hand and I'll bring over the microphone.
I mean, I could also give you a test.
Yes, thank you. I believe there is a question from Flaubert online.
Okay.
Let me try and unmute you.
Yes.
Oh,
wait, just one moment. Yeah.
I think I'm good now.
Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, Rosalind. Thank you to Erin and all the panelists. One question. I'm curious if there are some persistent knowledge gaps that an organization like IDRC could help to fill. Thank you.
Who wants to delve into that? I don't know, Elizabeth or yeah.
I mean, I guess from where we sit, there's some key levers. Maybe I won't focus on the gaps or the barriers, but what are the levers that help to enable? And we've been seeing that you need to really create that sort of impact investment demand. And given that governments are the largest economic actors in countries, we find that when public procurement actually rewards measurable, social or environmental outcomes, or when spending is tied to very specific results-based financing, you start to see markets form and capital flow. And then on the flip side of that, it's super important that how do you sort of create that necessary catalytic capital infrastructure? And this is where the institutional investors, and I think Canada is an interesting example of that, but the pension funds, the insurers, the sovereign funds, how these require scale and consistency and risk sharing and standardization. So that's why I think what we've seen success is where you have these large fund-to-fund platforms, and I was mentioning guarantees and blended finance vehicles are so critical because they help aggregate risk and they help drive pipeline and scale and thereby crowd in needed both domestic but also institutional capital. And then we've all been focused in different ways, shapes, and form on measurement and accountability. And as impact matures, it can't rely on just the narrative. It's so important that we actually have clear definitions and we have minimum reporting standards. And so this is where I feel like we're converging in a helpful way. And again, you see the example being set in Canada, where their Made in Canada taxonomy to further global science-based investment guidelines is providing needed definition and thereby certainty and confidence. So I feel like where we've been sitting sort of at a policy nexus, we know that regulation works when it unlocks institutional capital, it reduces that private sector risk, and it really tries to embed impact into national priorities. And if you don't have the right incentives and safeguards, private sector just perceive way too much risk. And if you don't have those, disclosure and impact standards, investors don't feel like they can really act with confidence. So anyway, these are some of the broader lessons and things that we've really been narrowing in on to unlock impact capital.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I think that's very detailed and great answer. And thanks, Flaubert, for the question. I'm just going to pass the mic over to you, Cam.
So maybe really simply, I'll say, I'm going to say it from a Government of Canada taxpayer dollars perspective. The question always becomes, why would we use our precious grants to fund somewhere else, right, and not in Canada? And so I think showing evidence of what works here in Canada in terms of impact investing, so the example we had on the healthcare was excellent because it actually allows you to better understand the value of it, and then linking that, I think, to the global south would be really, really useful because it makes a strong case both within Canada and globally as well. And I think we need more cases of that because in a tightening fiscal space, we all know it, there's very little funds out there. How do we better use that and how do we make those linkages?
Great. Okay, yeah.
I don't know if there's a chance for one small
comment. Go ahead, Shannon. Go ahead.
Just super quickly. I just want to add from my perspective, just a shout out to IDRC because I think that this focus on research and on helping the global south build some of this knowledge, I think is very, very important. I think in Central America, as one example, there's definitely this feeling of lack of understanding about what does the impact investing ecosystem look like, and it's important to get some of those baselines going, to get some of this public policy research going. And I think that some of those investigative pieces really are catalytic, and they really enable us to build on top of something. And there's not that many organizations that are willing to invest in that. And I think that IDRC is a key partner. And I think that your ability or their ability to see this and to see how instrumental that can be, I think is extremely, extremely valuable and very much appreciated. And I think that from a lot of this research that's created, that's when we're able to start, creating other actions that are, guided by some of this knowledge. So they are going to be more efficient and effective, and it's really going to enable the whole ecosystem to move forward much more quickly.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, and thanks to all of you, all of the panelists from the earlier and from just now. I think it's been a really super useful morning. And for those of you online, thanks for sticking with us. So I think a key takeaway from one of the key takeaways anyway from the discussion is that, of course, impact economies aren't just built through isolated initiatives, right? This is a sector that needs aligned partners, and it needs incentives, credible measurement, sustained collaboration. So in Canada, it really does have the opportunity to do what we do best, I think, bringing people together and to strengthen our leadership by learning and learning with and learning alongside our Global South partners and by using public policy to unlock scale and integrity across the ecosystem. So I just want to thank again the panelists and of course the team here at IDRC that put this in-person event on. I was saying to somebody earlier that we have to get back into the muscle memory of what it's like to host in-person events. So it's coming back. So that's good. And just thanks to the translators for the Kudo translators. I wasn't listening, but I'm sure it was c'était magnifique. So as you can see in the room here, there's some light snacks and refreshments, and I just really encourage you to take a moment. Everybody has to rush back to your offices, but just to use this unique opportunity of in-person, being here in person to get to know the people around you, maybe do a little bit of brainstorming, think about the 2X Global Summit that's going to be happening in September. What is it that we really want as an ecosystem, as a Canadian ecosystem to bring forth at that event, at that global event? And just finally, I think we're literally right at 12. The ideas that we heard today are not only transformational. I think some of them can really say that they are transformational, especially when we turn them into collaboration and concrete action. We use the care economy as an example, something that I think within our center we've really delved deeply into, because we feel so strongly that it is really part of the economic infrastructure that is needed for equity, for gender equality, and for economic growth. Yeah, just again, thinking about Jessica Espinosa's invitation to all of you for the 2X Global Summit, and let's start strategizing about how to use that space. So thank you so much.